Hello there. Welcome to Force Ghost Conversations. This podcast is your home for cozy deep dives into all things Star Wars and Lucasfilm adjacent properties. This is your host, Anthony King, and each week I will be joined by fans, creators, and believers in the principles from the galaxy far, far away to discuss the thematical elements from our favorite Lucasfilm properties. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to quite an exciting episode of Force Coast Conversations for you. I am so thrilled that we were able to get the incredible Daniel Noa and Peter Holmstrom from the Young Indy Chroniclers podcast on today's episode to chat all about their upcoming documentary, George Lucas, The Lost Golden Age. And I am like, this documentary is everything that I've ever wanted. It's right up my alley, and we have a lot of fun in this episode talking about all things, or at least the things that they want to share right now about it. And we, of course, have this Kickstarter that is where you can help support the documentary now. They have many tiers of rewards that, depending on the level that you support at, you can get a ton of great goodies from them. So that, of course, is in the show notes here. So be sure to go check that out and support them. And I know it a few times during the episode about the Kickstarter. So, yes, the show notes is exactly the place where you can find it. Also, if you just go to Kickstarter itself and search for George Lucas, The Lost Golden Age, you will find it as well, or just even a Google search too might even lead you right to the Kickstarter. So be sure to follow all that and support them. This is an incredible documentary, and hopefully we get to see it very, very soon. They've already succeeded one of the um, basic goals that they had set forth for the Kickstarter and have reopened it with more lofty goals, but we talk about that in the episode. So I'll leave it for that conversation then as well. So just before we get into that, let's talk about the news of the Star Wars and Lucasfilm-adjacent galaxy that's taken place over the last couple of weeks here. And did want to note that New York Comic Con did happen, and there was, as typically, there is a Star Wars panel at a publishing panel, I should more so say, that is at New York Comic Con. And there were many announcements there, including some new books such as Star Wars Legacy by Madeline Rue, which has an incredible cover of Rey and General Leia Organa and Kylo Ren. It'll feature an all new adventure. We'll follow Rey and Leia on a quest to mend the storied Skywalker lightsaber. So that's where you can finally learn that story about how the lightsaber that is broken, torn apart, if you will, in The Last Jedi is combined back together. It's an interesting story, I imagine, enough for a book here, and you can check out an interview with the author on StarWars.com right now. Additionally, there's a new book called Eyes Like Stars, a Star Wars romance novel. They're even putting that on the cover there, from author Ashley Poston, and it's the first official Star Wars romance novel, and it is set to come out in the summer of 2026, and it will be about a year and a half before the events of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, with all new characters, a mysterious artifact, and of course the First Order. There is going to be a Mandalorian and Grogu art of book from author Phil Shostak, who's done many of the other ones um, that the world has seen of this point, of the art books, and there's going to be a look back as well at season 3 of The Mandalorian, as well as Book of Boba Fett, channeled in the Mandalorian Grogu book. So be excited for that one. I certainly am, because I know that they've done a wonderful job with the concept art of the shows, and finally get to see some of that Book of Boba Fett stuff that's in, I believe, the credits of that show as well. There is going to be a new original manga titled Star Wars Visions Tsukumo. I hope I said that correctly there. And it's going to be from the creators of the latest Ultraman manga. And the story goes, in the wake of Order 66, a lone Jedi Knight accompanies a pair of droids to a rumored droid's paradise while being pursued by the evil Empire. And that'll come out on July 14th, 2026. The cover looks pretty cool. It's got like this like clone, uh, or this Jedi with a clone uh, trooper helmet on of sorts and holding a lightsaber. Looks pretty cool. Looks pretty cool, gotta say. There is going to be a continuation of some High Republic stories here with, or maybe even a return potentially, as they are noting that there's going to be a new mini series called Pathfinders from Dark Horse Comics. Looks like George Mann has taken the helm of the writing part of that, and we got the covers of the first two issues, and it will follow a brand new team of Republic Pathfinders as they just are dispatched to a distant corner of the galaxy to investigate the strange death of a Jedi Master. And this will take place approximately 20 years after the events of Phase 2 from the High Republic. So keep that in mind uh, if you're all like the canon junkies out there and looking for exactly when things are taking place over the course of everything here. Um, Lastly, wanted to note that there is a special one shot coming very soon that is going to be none other than, or I should say, featuring Jar Jar Binks, but also Master Keller and Beck. They're going to be in a one shot comic together with co writer being Ahmad Best, who portrayed both those characters, and Mark Guggenheim. So this is going to be awesome. It's called Jar Jar Binks #1, and this is also going to come out in February 2026. Um, so incredible stuff. There's some first looks at some things. Mandalorian visual guide, which is coming April 28th, 2026. Um, the 50 years of ILM book that's coming out in January. Got a special look at that. And the Art of Andor as well. It's coming May 19th of 2026. The Doug Chang book, which just pre-orders just came out, is coming in December of this year. Some more looks at Star Wars: The Art of the Acolyte from January 13th, 2026. So a whole lot of incredible stuff from that panel. Looks very action packed. So if you got to be there at New York Comic Con, then all the power to you, because that seemed like a really one of a kind panel demonstration there. Additionally, I did want to note that pretty much at the time of this episode's release on Sunday, the following week is when we will get Star Wars Visions Volume 3. And we, of course, will be covering that on the podcast pretty soon here. So be on the lookout for those episodes in the near future. And lastly, I did want to note that there is a bit of news that's not news. It's a non-news story, but it is a news story at the same time. You follow me here, folks. You'll get the gist of this. About Adam Driver's recent comments about the now failed or canceled, not not happening Hunt for Ben Solo movie. And some of my initial thoughts are available on our TikTok, of course. Just search for Force Ghost Conversations and you'll find us there. And basically, there was in like 2021, and then the years since, there was a attempt to create a um Ben Solo focused movie that was going to be about his redemption and be post Rise of Skywalker, etc. Who knows what the exact details would be, but they were pretty far along. Did hold the whole screenwriting, had a full script, started putting budget together and timeline and whatnot, um, and it was pretty much approved and greenlit by Lucasfilm. Went to Disney for the next phase of approvals, and then that's where it got shut down. Which seems like it was a first, according to other sources that have come out in the since the initial announcement by Adam Driver here, and really a random article interview that he had that just kind of dropped this big news here. Um, so ultimately, I'm really disappointed that this story didn't come to fruition in the way that it did. The other side of this thing here is a myriad of things. So this some people are speculating this could be, I guess, the like Ryan Reynolds leaking a Deadpool kind of information footage, right? And that got people excited, and then kind of tied Fox's hands behind their backs and said, "All right, we got to move forward with this because people like it." Um, it has that potential, right? Because a lot of people on the internet are saying like, "Hey, this is an interesting project. Let's move forward with this." And maybe that's enough pressure on Disney to reverse their decision. I don't know. Um, the other side of things here, at least from my perspective, that is, I guess, the more apt thing here is that Lucasfilm said yes to it, and to me, that means like they're not hard and fast to the to the events, not necessarily the events of what happens in Rise of Skywalker, which I think they're certainly believe in and tied to, which I do as well. But the fact that who knows what the story really entails? How does one, um, what is the next step beyond that? I don't know. It could be really interesting about like what does it mean to be one with the Force? Is it his time and whatnot? Is he sent back? I don't know. I mean that could all be on the table there in terms of what the story would entail for someone to return, or could be really metaphysical and whatnot and be a character piece. I again, who knows? So the positivity side that I'm looking at this here is that Lucasfilm was very on board with the thing here and liked the story beats that they presented here in the events in the post events of Rise of Skywalker story there. And there are many projects currently at work in Lucasfilm at the moment, and maybe they can rework this into something that they're currently exploring right now. Right, the Ray film is out there in the ether. Simon Kinberg's episodes, I guess 10, 11, and 12 are kind of out there in the ether as well. So who knows the potential of where this could fall into play here, but I'm actually pretty optimistic by this news and not as shut down about it. So I think that there's great opportunity for what this could entail for the future here, and I hope that maybe by me speaking out loud here is enough for you all to be excited about this as well. So a little sadness in the short term that it was immediately kind of rejected by the larger corporation at Disney, but always in motion again. The future is who knows what the ultimate outcome will be here. So those are my thoughts. That is the Cloud City Gossip segment for this week's episode. Um, and pretty let's get into our main topic discussion with Daniel and Peter. But also before we get into that, of course, because I don't think I plug it at the end here, make sure you follow Force Ghost Conversations on all things social media. So we're available on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and because we're trying to up our social game here a little bit more. So hopefully you can go and follow us and engage. We'd love to continue the conversation in some way, shape, or form. So please do so. And tell your friends about Forest Ghost Conversations. Share the podcast with them. Um, do all the things right. Leave a follow us, subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and review. It really helps to grow the show in many ways. So I appreciate you all for your continued support. And with that, let's get into our conversation with Daniel and Peter about George Lucas, The Lost Golden Age. Stay tuned. All right, folks, welcome back to Forest Ghost Conversations, and I am so thrilled for today's episode. We were talking off air, and I could almost contain my excitement. I couldn't contain it, frankly. This is an era of George Lucas's story, and Lucasfilm, I think, is so under discussed, under talked about. It frankly, the sky's the limit for what these two gentlemen here are going to do with this wonderful project here. And you may have seen on our social accounts, but maybe across their social accounts too, that there is a Kickstarter currently in the works for an upcoming documentary titled George Lucas, The Lost Golden Age, which is going to chronicle that kind of missing period of the Lucasfilm George Lucas story, the 1989 through 1999, which will tackle all the cool projects such as the Young Indiana Jones Adventures, also known as the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, depending on how you want to look at it there. The Radioland Murders, the special editions, right? All the incredible stuff that went along the way that led us to the prequel trilogy. So, like I said, we have the people behind the scenes that are putting this Kickstarter together. We have Peter Holmstrom and Daniel Noa from the Young Indy Chroniclers podcast themselves, but they're also taking that next leap forward and are going to actually make a feature documentary about this period of George Lucas's life. So, welcome, gentlemen, to Forest Ghost Conversations. Peter, let's start with you. How are you doing? And welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having us here. It's a real pleasure. It's great to meet you, and thanks for having us on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Daniel, how are you doing? And welcome to Force Ghost Conversations.
Thank you. I'm great. I have a question. If this is Force Coast Conversations, are we dead?
I like to think of it as the Force Ghosts are surrounding us. They're always with us. So,
yes.
they are just as much a part of the conversation as we are here. They are the force behind the scenes guiding us to our ultimate destination, which is enlightenment.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. We bind the universe together, Daniel. That's what we're doing.
And
I agree.
technically, you are, because this documentary is covering, like I was like, you've coined it before, and I've kind of alluded to it here, but it's that lost age of that Lucasfilm story here, which is, we've been, I would say, as fans, so I guess the best word here is spoiled when it comes to behind the scenes content and the Lucasfilm of it all, because they have an archive and they've done such a great job over the years of chronicling so many of these great stories here. So like I'm thinking just immediately some of those documentaries from the 80s and 90s about Lucasfilm, particularly about the original trilogy, right? I'm thinking of that VHS specifically about the making of Star Wars. The thing near and dear to my heart, of course, is Empire of Dreams,
Sure.
which is so
It's a
good.
great one.
And of course, Light and Magic recently has really talked about the ILM story about all things here. But I think the work that you guys are doing is really going to propel this that missing part there forward, right? I feel like it's Light and Magic really didn't touch upon this era at all, which is kind of like the big miss, I would say, of that. But it opened up the opportunity for you both to take this mantle forward here. Now, before we get into that conversation, I do want to like kind of create a foundation for our listeners who may not be aware of the Young Indy Chroniclers, and want to hear about your stories a little bit here about how you kind of got into this space, or like, hey, let's start a whole podcast on the Young Indiana Jones adventures, and let's highlight some of the behind the scenes folks, and find out where the heck Rick McCallum is out there in the world, and get him on on a podcast too. So, where did your interest in this topic come from, both Young Indy and this era of Lucasfilm? So, Daniel, let's start with you on this one. Take us to the beginning. Where did your interest come from here?
Well, yeah, I discovered Young Indiana Jones in 1999. So at that period you're kind of talking about when the Phantom Menace was coming out, and there was a lot of behind the scenes storytelling, a lot of writing, and there were these little mentions, usually from like Rick in a documentary. He'd mention Young Indy, and you'd be a kid, and you're like, what is that? He can't be talking about that
Mm-hmm.
one scene. What is it? And then you realize, oh no, there was this whole series, and I missed it, when it was on TV, and now they're out on videotape, and they're making it look like the movies, and that's a cool thing. And so that's how I dove into it. And even then, and I would say from that point, it just felt like it wasn't something people really talked about or were really aware of, even though
Nope.
it had been it was very elaborate. A lot of work had gone into it, right? And a lot of technological advancement had happened as a part of it. And each of those tapes opened with a little documentary that explained some of that, right? So I was aware of it then. I met Peter some years ago. He was already a very successful podcaster. And, we had this conversation, and, saying, no one's ever done a Young Indiana Jones podcast. It's never been done. There isn't one. And so many of these big franchises, whatever you're a fan of, they have so many podcasts. They have many podcasts, right? So here's an opportunity to do something adjacent to Indiana Jones, which is adjacent to Star Wars,
Yeah.
that, no one's touched. Wouldn't that be cool? And that's where it started. I don't think either of us thought then that we would get Rick McCallum realistically, or Ben Burtt. Like we thought, yeah, we'll have. I don't even know that we thought it was going to be all interviews. We're like, well, we'll have some interviews, and
Mm-hmm.
that we're probably not going to be able to get a ton of people, so we'll come up with other formats, and we'll have a show, and do it. And it just became very quickly an oral history with some of the most fascinating and interesting people. And I don't take any credit for that. Just like that's who they are, and they came on the show, and it's been wonderful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the work that you guys have done so far has been astounding. And you're right in so much as like no one is tackling that era. And it's a shame too, because there was that brief, wonderful period where it was available on Disney Plus, and then a brief little period before that too, where the Young Indiana Jones Adventures was also on Paramount Plus. So like it's readily not available to like the ways that people consume media nowadays, right? And the DVDs are getting more and more expensive by the day. And if you got a VHS player, God bless you, because those are also super expensive nowadays. And first off, you got to track that down and find the right CRT, unless you want to look at it horribly on a 60-inch 4K TV these days. Which I tried playing my Shadows of the Empire game on that the other day, and it did not look as great as
It's a
I
real
remembered it
shame.
looking as a kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a shame that it's not as available, but you guys are keeping the flame alive of the Young Indy Jones story, because it is and we'll get into it with the documentary here, but I firmly believe, and I think you guys do too, that this is the testing ground and the proving ground by which they are able to like figure out the ideas and the talent and get the people that are really the through lines that then lead to the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones. Like the digital revolution is forged in Young Indiana Jones Adventures. So Peter, throwing it over to you now. Where did you get into all this, and what's your origin here?
It's in some ways it's similar to Daniel's. Like Young Indiana Jones was in that conversation of like the Star Trek animated series or like Star Wars droids or something, where it was like these titles that were kind of talked about or alluded to, but it was never there was never a sense that they were canon. There was never a sense that this was like, oh, this is something you should seek out. There's kind of this, maybe you'd see them at like a convention or whatever. You might pick up a VHS, but so I discovered it as well. I don't really remember when, but I think the first one I watched was Daredevils of the Desert on VHS, and really loved it a lot. And then the DVDs came out. I was able to pick those up, and for a long time it was this great show that I was just passionate about and enjoyed. But yeah, then meeting Daniel, the first time we met was at Star Wars Celebration, and
Wow.
formed a friendship from there. And I think too, like we're of that age where it's like we grew up in that time where like there was a lot of anti-George sentiment, and a lot of just like prequel bashing and special edition bashing and all this stuff. And Daniel and I both were, kind of felt maybe a little isolated when at that time, just because we were like, well, we like this stuff, and so to find like-minded people even today still feels like, oh, this is great. And yeah, and it was after a screening of Revenge of the Sith here in LA where we just were chatting about why Young Indiana Jones hasn't been talked about more, and especially given how impressive the show is. And yeah, I mean, and we were just very lucky with all of the guests we've gotten, and incredibly lucky. Like it's been remarkable, and I think so much of it is just because the people behind the scenes are incredibly proud of it, and I've just never been asked. Like I don't think Rick would come onto a Star Wars podcast just because he's talked about it so much. Right. He's just like, I'm bored. But Young Indiana Jones is a topic ripe for exploration.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been really gratifying, really heartwarming just to see the outpouring of support for the project. So, yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right on the Rick front too, right? He's like, how many interviews have I done over the years? Ask me about Red Tails, please. Do something else. Please, for love of God, don't ask me another Star Wars. I mean, I'm just thinking about the George kind of quote from like the Wall Street Journal the other day talking about the museum where he's like, I wish I could not include any Star Wars in this. I don't want people coming here to do that. But I feel like if you guys asked him about the Young Indie Chroniclers, he'd be like couldn't get there fast enough, right?
I hope so. That's my dream.
I guess that's the ultimate,
hopeful.
like the ultimate Kickstarter dream. Get people support the Kickstarter, and maybe they can make that wonderful ask to the George Lucas team and get him behind a camera to talk about this thing. It'd be so
It
cool.
certainly wouldn't hurt. I'll put that out there.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I think that's incredible, and I want to get into the documentary now, fellas. Here, and frankly, there is like a great through line between the work on the Young Indy Jones Chronicles, and through the special edition that then, like we were saying, leads into the prequel trilogy here, and I'm just curious, like taking that through line now, you did this podcast, now you want to do a documentary about this era. I guess my first question for you both about this is like, why make a documentary? Why this? Why now? Why this format? Peter, let's start with your thoughts on that matter.
Yeah, I think part of the reason both Daniel and I work in the film industry, so that's one thing. I produce documentaries in kind of my day job, I guess you could say,
Nice.
and I think both of us just feel like, and even going back to when we were talking about the podcast, it was like there's not that kind of like highlight, even though George is like one of the biggest filmmakers of all time, and everybody knows his name. There's still not the appreciation for his work and just how innovative he was and how much he
Agreed.
truly pushed us kind of pushed the entire world really kicking and screaming into the digital age, and now everything is made in that
Yeah.
way, and like there's not that kind of respect. It's like everybody kind of points to other people, and it's like, no, George is the reason we're here. It's not, you know Terminator 2, as great as James Cameron work is in that, it's like even that was ILM, and
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
there's just not that kind of appreciation. So what we thought was like, here's this opportunity to really highlight that and to really give credit where credit is due, and not do it in a way of like, not do it in the snarky way that a lot of, I think, previous uh, independent documentaries have done about George, where it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, he's fine, but I could have done it better or whatever. It's like there's that kind of hubris with a lot of these guys, and so we're coming at it with a large amount of respect and a large amount of like, let's highlight not just George, but also the craftsmen who worked on the show, who really made something truly remarkable on an incredibly tight budget. Like a budget that was less than most TV shows, and yet they were able to do
Hmm.
something truly remarkable. Um, and yeah, so that maybe I'll end there and let Daniel pick up the next part of that answer.
Well, it's something you were kind of getting at. We were recording yesterday for the documentary. We were with Matthew Jacobs, who was one of our early guests on the podcast. He's a writer on Young Indiana Jones and also on several LucasArts video games. And as we were talking about, the podcast and the film, what I remembered realizing maybe about halfway through our podcast journey was that while we had set out to do a podcast about young Indiana Jones, I think we ended up making a podcast about George.
Mm.
And not only were there, of course, many stories of him, but we were getting a picture of him and his character
Yeah.
through both the work, but also his relationships with all these people. And I think that's why the film is called George Lucas,
Got it.
right? Because the film is about him and his impact. I think as to why the format of a film, another thing I think I said in one of our videos was, we've now got so many hours of the podcast, it would be absurd for me to expect anyone to sort of listen to the whole thing to get that picture of George. I mean, some people hopefully will, but it's just not going to be a mass thing. But in a film, in a 90-minute or 2-hour film that can be given as a gift, that can be
Hmm.
watched in the evening, a whole broader group of people could potentially get this story about George. And
Yeah.
I think what we've learned doing the podcast is if you miss this part of his story, you don't know George. And I don't think it's fair for people to judge his work, to judge him, to evaluate his life without getting the full picture. And that's what we're trying to do.
No, I think you're absolutely 100% right here, and that's actually a great through line of sorts, segue, if you will, into my next question here, which is like, you know, there's been so much about George Lucas and his life over the years, but this era is like it's there's nothing. It's like the tumbleweed is going through the town when it comes to this era, right? I'm just thinking like there's like that in George Lucas a life book. There's like hardly anything, and I was like, this is the era I want to learn about the most because everything else is so much more talked about, right? And then I think there's the Dan Madsen book, like little quick book about the behind the scenes for Young Indiana Jones, and that's honestly a little bit it. And you maybe get like some stories here and there, but like John Knoll being like, we'd ask every year at the company retreat, are we getting more Star Wars anytime soon? And then fatefully that one day he was like, yeah, we're gonna do it. And then um I think there's like both in Light and Magic and I think the beginning, right? They showcase George going to in his office, dropping the kids off at school, and then going home, going upstairs to his huge mahogany wood desk, and saying, "This is day one. I'm going to start writing the Phantom Menace, or what would then become the Phantom Menace." But then he decides to watch Buster Keaton movies the entirety of the day, and then
Research.
it's like, okay, the special editions come out, yada yada yada, and then we start filming day one, The Phantom Menace. The prequels come out, big fanfare for that, and we're all. It seems like we're all prequelists here, so we enjoyed them very much. And like I did catch that note, Peter. It is like anytime you hear someone that is like, yeah, I like the prequels, you're like, oh, sigh of relief. I can talk freely here. I don't have to mask anything here. I can be my true self.
Absolutely.
Um, so I guess the question is, why do you think this era has gotten so little recognition? Because you guys are believers in this. I'm a believer in this. This is like I was saying earlier. This is the foundational period by which they're getting the talent, they're getting the people in positions, they're thinking through the ideas logically. they're creating an avant-garde TV show at this time that is something that's arguably never been done before at that time. They're going on location, filming these incredible stories, vignettes, if you will. They're not the 40-minute action adventure serial that ABC thought they were probably getting for a Young Indiana Jones series. They got instead holy cow, there's like these feature long stories about, yeah, actually young Indy meeting historical people and using this as like a way to teach kids about history, and also through the lens of Indiana Jones himself learning about history so that we understand the guy more, why he has all this knowledge going into the events of the Indiana Jones saga. So that's my mind-boggling question that you guys are answering here for this, but why do you think this era hasn't been covered so much? Daniel, start us off here. Why nothing in this era?
I think it has to do with a couple of factors. One, most of the stories that have been told about, George and Lucasfilm have been told by outsiders, really, like some of the stuff you just mentioned. Um, and so the Gen X people, the older people who have been, writing books and sort of been in the positions of power in these different industries that cover these things, they're no fan of the prequels. They have no interest in the origins of the prequels, and you know maybe it was good that they didn't, because I'd rather they didn't say anything than
Yeah,
be
fair.
hostile or something. And also too, the collaborators that Lucas had in the first part of his career had mostly gone their own way, by this period, which means they were available for things like interviews and,
Mhm.
more accessible to journalists and so forth. Whereas, you know, as you'll see, and both in the podcast and in the film, in this period, Lucas has a smaller circle of collaborators that he works more closely with, Rick McCallum, Ben Burt, people who worked closely with him, maintained a relationship with him for a long time, and did not go out, giving a lot of interviews and spilling any tea, so to speak, about what went on in this period. And so, if you're a writer, there's just less for you to work with. And honestly,
Mhm.
I don't know that if we had attempted this project 10 years ago, we would have been able to secure some of these interviews. There's something to be said for the passage of 30 years and people being willing to talk and share their memories.
Yeah.
But what's always surprising, even yesterday talking to Matthew, the stories you hear that you're shocked about because you had no context for that in your imagination of what the era contained. Because of course, why would you? How would you know what was going on? But we
Absolutely.
just have this illusion that we know what went on. We're fans, and we don't. And so I think of course, they were private. He wasn't inviting TV shows up to the ranch all the time and showing
Mhm.
everything off all the time, right? And then a lack of interest on the part of the Gen X, the power brokers, we'll call them, the defenders of the faith, that were keeping the secret scrolls from us all this time. And now it's our turn to open the veil.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, you're right. I think that's wonderfully well put. That it is such a good thing that they didn't get their hands on this era to claim the narrative, if you will, right? Like this arguably is for the age of people that grew up with the prequels, and this is our story to tell. Like this is our, like you were saying, it's a way to say it's a George story, but it's a way. It sounds like you guys are saying thank you to George for this too through the documentary here. Peter, am I on the right track here? And why do you think that this era was like forgotten in some ways?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we absolutely are doing this as just like a thank you or a love letter, so to speak, to George. It's and I think largely our motivation and kind of the driving force for us is to echo what Daniel said, is like the previous generation who wrote their books, did their documentaries, didn't do that. You know,
Hmm.
they say, if they did say thank you, they said thank you for the one film that changed their lives, and they were like, yeah, but Ewoks suck, and we're never going to talk about it again.
Right.
And my favorite myth over the last 10 years or so is that Marshall Lucas was the real creative genius behind Star Wars. It's just
Hmm.
couldn't be further from the truth. Not to like bash on the woman or anything, but it's just like she was just there. She
One
had
of
a
many
couple.
editors on the project.
Yeah, and she wasn't even there for that long. By her
Hmm.
own words, she left. She was there for 4 months. She went off to work on Taxi Driver, because
Hmm.
she was viewing it as a film that, and I have to go make a living. Um, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I was gonna
uh,
joke too. Yeah, if George isn't gonna bring in money with this project here, I got to make money for the
Ex
family and go
well,
work on
truly,
Jurassic
truly, truly,
Park.
absolutely right, absolutely right. But, you know, there was such a desire on the part of Gen Xers to not give credit to George, and I
Mhm.
think that's the real tragedy of the guy, because he's a humble guy, and, like, one of the great we heard him so many times yesterday from Matthew, how many times George would, like, uh not want the praise focused on him. He would try to focus it on the writers, try to focus it on other people on the show because he's a humble guy, and he just wants to make his art the way he wants to make it. And there's something really really wonderful about that. But so often, like bullies on the playground, they'll pick on the guy who doesn't fight back. And I think George just has spent his life kind of not really fighting back. And so like we're taking this opportunity to kind of maybe not fight for him. That sounds a little too grand, but at least like throw some love and support his way because this is such a wonderful time. And yeah, I think yeah, I guess just echoing a lot of stuff Daniel has said about why it's not been more focused on in the past. Um, and I think too, like success breeds, attention.
Hmm.
Like
Mhm.
Young Indiana Jones didn't really find an audience. I think Radioland Murders definitely, wasn't the hit that people wanted it to be. And new Blu-ray coming out soon though.
It's a
Go,
shame.
go pick
I
that
got
up.
it pre-ordered.
Me
Yeah,
too.
us too. Us too. We'll be watching it.
I'm
It's
really
it's
waiting for the
next week, isn't
4K.
it?
I'm
It's
like,
wow.
give me that 4K. Come
Well, you
on,
might
guys.
have some time to wait there,
Up,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But,
upscale this
Blu-ray
thing.
is an excellent archival format, I will
It
say.
is.
Like
Yes.
it's 1-to-1, frame. So like no complaints about that.
And Kino does great work, so it's worth supporting those guys. Um, yeah, the special edition I think just been kind of co-opted by the previous generation, and the narrative there was dictated by them. Even the narrative of the prequels was largely dictated by them in the sense of it's dismissed.
Hmm.
So a lot of the glory of that era has been lost, and so we're kind of setting the stage, I guess, maybe for a reappraisal of a lot of the work.
We
Yeah.
have an we have an episode coming out. By the time you hear this, it'll have just come out on the Young Indy Chroniclers with an ILM artist named Yusei Isugi,
Ooh.
who Rick told us about, and it's a great interview and developed some of the early digital map painting techniques in ILM. But he also did the shot of in the special edition the land speeder entering Moss Eisley, and it's been in a
Mm.
lot of our promotion for the film. Uh, and he explains sort of the groundbreaking nature of that shot and how it was the first time a shot like that had been rendered, and something I've talked with Peter about a lot and said in different things. It's really sad that this groundbreaking shot, which is technically in one of the most famous and successful films of all time, is never talked about, because the only thing anyone will ever talk about is how horrible it is that you put these effects in this movie instead of this artist who paints by hand, was able to take his paintings, map it onto 3D geometry, figure out sort of in his head like how this should all work, how this could make sense to do this,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And now we have this shot that opens up this world of Star Wars that I think all of us as 10 and 12-year-olds was just like mind blown by. That, oh, there are all these streets and roads and all this stuff's going on. I mean, to us, it was just the coolest thing in the world. So there you have great art, great technology, and an igniting of imagination in kids. And none of it is ever going to be talked about because we just hate what he did to those movies, a Gen Xer would say.
And I just want to plus that too, just to be like that shot then became normalized in every other big budget film going forward, like in the prequels as well. Like as soon as the Phantom Menace comes out, suddenly every battle in every big budget blockbuster had thousands of people. Whereas like 3 years before, something like Braveheart, you had a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of dozen, barely anybody really. And yet suddenly the entire paradigm gets shifted by the work of George, but George is never talked about as like hey, this is why, like he's not lauded in the same way as like the jazz singer is lauded as bringing
Mm.
sound, or even like Gone with the Wind with color film or whatever. It's not Gone with the Wind, I'm sorry. Wizard of Oz,
Wizard of
Wizard of
Oz.
Oz was
Same
color.
here. Same here. Yeah.
But instead it's just like it's never even the dots are not connected, and it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost weird 'cause it's like for the digital revolution, it's like almost all the credit goes solely to Jurassic Park. And although it is
Yes.
very much a seminal, like, threshold movie of the sort, right? That's just like the beginning of sorts of what it could do, and then also through ILM, by the way, folks. And then from there, it's the springboard of like, okay, what can we do with this to further it? And that's really what the special edition comes to. I know there's also Casper in between there and a couple other films too, but it's really with that special edition where George is really like, oh, there were things that I didn't like about that I had to quickly do because the unions were getting mad at me in England, and and I was having panic attacks going to ILM every day, and we had to quickly rush this thing because Fox was like, this is coming out in May no matter what. So now I get to finally create these things in the way that I wanted them to and expand upon the world. I think it shows great world building in every one of those sequences that they add to it. And honestly, I think they look great. And obviously, if they're of their time, but all CG is of its time, right? And I remember being a couple years old in those special edition screenings and being like, this is amazing. I was the right target audience and it worked for me. And I think they're great, and that's ultimately where I'll end on that one. But yes, so we're on the same we're on the same page here because I could go on my soapbox forever about how awesome the special editions are, and boy, don't get me started on the 2004 special editions. Which, 'cause to George's credit, right? I always do like that he never stopped tinkering with it, even to 2013 and later on with the McClunky of it all.
I wish he
Um,
was still tweaking it.
I
I wish he
agree.
was still going.
You're
Still
I'd buy
there.
every version. Let's
there
go.
Absolutely.
there was a part of me that when seeing Revenge of the Sith this past April in for the re-release, I was like, man, is there one last nugget? Is there something that George had for us? Is there a McClunky in here? Right? Give it to me. And unfortunately, I didn't catch any. But
Well, I love that you brought up Revenge of the Sith because actually I think it lends credence to George's claim that he is just trying to sort of get at what he was trying to do. Because as far as I know, there's only ever been two changes to that movie post-release, both incredibly minor. One is a transition near the end. It's kind of gone back and forth between an iris wipe and not. You
okay.
first see Anakin's metal hand in the ground on Mustafar, right? So I don't even know, frankly, if that was a artistic choice or an error that was
Yeah.
then fixed. You know what I mean? Like it's honestly that minor. It could
Right.
just be like, I thought, what happened to my wipe? But the other one is when the clones arrive on Utapau. In every version since the Blu-ray, you hear audio of the soldiers communicating, saying things. Just kind of soldier talk, right?
Hmm.
That's not in the theatrical or the DVD.
Right.
And it's again super minor change. But what I take from that is, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, he was in such mastery of the technology that he was able to get what he wanted.
Yes.
Right? Like he didn't have a shot where he's like, that's not right. We were rushing, and like, which in clones, there was actually probably the most instances of that. If you were able to get your hand, which is hard to do, get your hand on a theatrical cut of Attack of the Clones compared to even the DVD. They made so many fixes between because they were rushing on that movie, and things were slipping through, right?
Hmm.
So like I think he's being honest when he's like, no, like I got a release date, I gotta make my date, and sometimes I don't get what I want, and I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna use this technology to
But
get
that
what I
DVD
want.
comes out a year later, and I got a lot of time to tinker in between here.
Yeah.
And I always think about in the beginning documentary, right, where Rick McCallum's office, where it's like, this film is coming out May 1999, no
Yep.
matter what.
No matter what, on
Yeah,
budget.
on budget too. That's right. Yep. Give me more scenes where they're all sitting around the table talking budget. I
Yeah.
love
Oh,
it.
yeah. Well, and I think it's worth remembering too that they delayed the movie by 2 years. The original
Mhm.
release date was 97.
Yeah,
And they just had to delay it, and like even the version that we saw in theaters in '99 is not the version we see now.
that's right.
They
That Padre scene is a little different.
exactly. If it had been done, if a studio had done it, they would have called it like the director's cut or something. Because but instead, George was like, no, I'm not even going to promote this. I'm just going to be like, I just add stuff back in, and
Hmm.
that's the finalized version. But it's yeah, it is just wild his devotion to that art, and that even just then like him and ILM paying the money, this wasn't free. You had to pay to finish off the deleted scenes. It's like you never get that
True.
done today.
Yeah.
It's, I
Good
mean,
luck.
yeah, because it costs so much money. I mean, just to finish off these things, it's like oftentimes now, the editing is happening contemporaneously with the visual effects. So it's like that way things can be edited out before visual effects are even paid for. But what that also means is like you're not really able to correct for things that
Mhm.
don't work, or maybe things that you wish could have been done um, when you see the final version, or getting close to a final version. So oftentimes, you're not able to make those kind of changes. Whereas George is always just like, I'm not, this isn't done until I'm happy with it, and
Yeah.
there's something really just, a lot of people complain about that. I think it's so wonderfully optimistic, because like that is that should be the driving force for any artist, is that sense of like perfection in their art.
Mhm.
And that's what pushes us forward. And I think so often in the film industry today, it's more just like, I just want to get paid and go home. and and don't get me wrong, we're all very tired out here, but there's something just wonderful about a filmmaker who's in it for the art, and it's
Yeah.
very rare now in Hollywood.
Let me take us back to a point about the digital revolution you made in Jurassic Park. It's interesting because Jurassic Park was certainly a breakthrough for character animation, for 3D character
Mhm.
animation, right? But when you get to the special edition and the Phantom Menace, there is certainly a lot of character animation in that movie, but there's also this idea of creating worlds. You called it world building.
Yeah.
That comes from Young Indiana Jones. Like, I would argue there is no digital
Yes.
precedent to that outside of Young Indiana Jones. They were able to construct the world of the early 20th century with a mix of location photography, sometimes quite excellent, but also matte paintings that were at first enhanced and then composed digitally, composited digitally. As I said, you'll hear in that interview, he talks about having to do 5 times the amount of work in terms of creating matte paintings for the Young Indiana Jones as compared to a feature film. And so using digital technology to make a pipeline where that would be possible was what they did. And so once you learn that you can do that, and then they did it in Radioland Murders, applying that to a 35 millimeter, big screen film, and then taking that to the special editions in the Phantom Menace. As Peter mentioned, post 99, any blockbuster is going to use both of those technologies. So you have this tree that grows a branch, yes, from Jurassic Park, but also from Young Indiana Jones, right? And like, as you said, all we ever hear about is Jurassic Park. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to speculate as to why that is, although I have theories. But I think it's time to shed more light on the Young Indiana Jones chapter. Which again, full credit to George, who not only conceived the show but said, "I want to do it in a way where when we go to London, when we go to any of these places, there's no compromise. I want us to be
Mm.
there. I want to see everything. I want it to feel real."
Yes. Is the theory that people like dinosaurs more than Indiana Jones talking to Tolstoy about Christy Mathewson?
Well, I mean, I get it. I'm not saying I don't understand it. I'm just,
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. I want to talk specifically about the documentary here, and you have launched a Kickstarter, which has proven really, really successful to this point. I applaud you both for the success that it's had so far, and you've even in the last couple of days relaunched it. I saw to keep growing the possibilities of what this project can become. So, how does the Kickstarter support enable you to achieve your ultimate vision? Peter, let's start with you on this one, and be your own George Lucas here in this matter.
I mean, we're at a very unique time in the film industry. I guess we always are, but as Matthew talked about yesterday, but we're at a very unique time where supportive documentary projects has kind of dried up,
Mhm.
especially from like grants and financing perspective. So like Kickstarter really offers us the opportunity to independently produce this film on our own terms, and do it in a way that allows us the flexibility to make it at different kind of levels as well. So like when we launched the Kickstarter, we launched it with a specific goal in mind, thinking that this could be a way for us to produce a documentary, primarily shoot interviews in the States, do it on a budget, call in favors wherever we can. And we we weren't even sure if we were going to get that, kind of touching on stuff we've talked about already. It's support for Young Indy is up in the air. Like we're not really sure, you know, and kind of this era has been largely unsung. So we weren't sure how it would do, and we were absolutely floored just how much success we've had with it so far. So then because of that, we were able to set the sights a little higher and talk about like, oh, what if we were able to earn enough that we could go to the UK, go to other countries to film in?
Mhm.
Because so many of these young Indiana Jones, to Daniel's point earlier, young Indiana Jones primarily filmed internationally and used a lot of international crews, a lot of international cast, a lot of international talent. So the ability to go to the UK to get Jonathan Hales, who was the writer, Gavin Bouquet, who's the production designer, you know, David Tattersall, you know, people who, you know, we wouldn't be able to get here in LA. Is a really tantalizing possibility. Obviously, Rick lives in Prague, so like the
Mhm.
ability just to go to him. These people are very busy. You know, that's the wonderful thing is like Young Indy got these guys when they were just starting out. You know, a lot of these guys it was very early in their careers, so they're still all very active, even you know 30 years later. You know, Gavin Bouquet is working on the Avengers movies right now. You
Yeah.
know, it's like
Yeah.
he's a busy guy. So the ability for us to then go to them and be like, hey, we'll work around your schedule. Is very important, and obviously we want to give something back to the fans who maybe could help us get to that level. So you
Mhm.
know we've been very lucky to have a good relationship and conversation with Joel McNeely, who has very kindly offered to write and compose a theme just for this documentary in the
Let's tell
style
the
of,
audience who may not know that
of course,
Joel
yeah,
composed. He was one of the two main composers for the Young Indiana Jones show. He was also the composer and arranger for Radioland Murders because Joel is
Yep.
a classical composer, but he's also very skilled at arranging, you know, jazz and all kinds of musical performance. He did the Scandal of the 1920, won an Emmy for that, by the way, on Young Indiana Jones. And more recently, has worked on American Dad for Seth MacFarlane and produced all of Seth's performance records, his music that he does. So, you know, we didn't think, you know, Joel, we weren't sure that Joel would be interested in we were asking him to even sit for an interview. And so to have him, you
Mhm.
know, say, hey, I want to help you out with this was a huge blessing to us.
yeah, you know, and I don't know, Daniel, if you have anything else to add here about the
Well,
documentary.
I think what you were leading to is that, you know, since Joel has offered to uh, compose a theme for us that we're actually in the process of announcing. I think by the time this airs, we will have announced a stretch goal of $40,000. At which, if we were to reach that, we would give every backer a copy of the soundtrack of the film, which would include, of course, Joel's theme. And then, of course, we'll have other music, and we have not figured out who our other composer will be yet, of course, but we will get one. You know, there will be one. We've actually I've talked to a couple people. There's certainly been interest, so there will be a soundtrack, and that will be you know, given as a free album to our backers if we reach that 40,000. And then, you know, something we've talked about is, you know, if we were able to get to over 50,000, you know, we could make what I think, as Peter put it, the film we see in our heads. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
and so at that level, you know, a project that Peter and I have talked about since the beginning, uh, which was that, you know, about young Indiana Jones and this period, frankly, that there's never been a book, and that we have all these interviews that we've conducted, you know, that we would write a book about this, and something we've talked about for a long time. And so if we were able again to get over that 50,000 mark, you know, we would give every backer a copy of that book, right? So so these are our plans for the film, and as I said, I think if we get over that 50,000 mark, we can make that movie that we dream, which is going to include, as he said, you know, people in the UK, Rick in Prague, maybe even some interviews with some Australians, you know, which I
Mhm.
dangle as a carrot out there.
Ooh.
But you know, on the technical side, if I can just speak to what the Kickstarters can support, you know, there's a lot of software. You know, I worked at Disney for several years, doing a lot of, you know, interviews and behind the scenes type stories. And most of the software that I use there is expensive and can't just, you know, be maintained sort of personally indefinitely, right?
Yeah.
But this budget would allow us to, you know, to get that level of production software for the duration of the film, allow us to build our own, you know, the graphics that you need to really make a professional looking documentary, you know, at that standard that people expect. Sound mixing and all those things. So that's all baked into the budget of the film. and equipment. We were talking yesterday, if we are able, and this is why the UK was set at that $30,000 goal, was that, you know, if we were able to travel, that would require us traveling with equipment, and so we would have to not only get equipment, but get equipment that you could travel with, which has its own sort of special requirements, right? So those are all the things you have to consider when you're making a film like this. And I'm just so thrilled with the interviews we've gotten so far, and the idea of being able to get that quality of conversation with the Ben Burt, with the Rick McCallum on this topic. It really is a dream. And I just want to say a thank you to everybody who's backed, because I'll tell you guys, you know, we put this podcast on, you know, we funded it essentially out of our pocket, and you're always trying to, like, you know, stretch a dollar and bend, and, like, I mean,
Yep.
I've been using and I don't want to knock this program because it's served me well, but I've been using a program called Affinity Photo as a Photoshop sort of replacement, and I've been able to do a lot with it, but it is not, you know, right, there's just some things you can't do, and so you have to constantly be looking for these workarounds, and sometimes spending extra hours on something that, you know, in Photoshop you could do in 2 seconds, right? So the benefit of having this budget, of having this financial support, and being able to, and I think this would be something George would say, to focus on making the film, to not have to focus on the tools and what I can do with the tools, and how, you know, what I can produce with the tools, but actually just focus on the vision of the film, is a huge blessing. It's a huge gift. And, you know, whatever we end up bringing in, ultimately, whatever it is, it's tremendously helpful. And it's going to make this film 10 times better than it could possibly be if we were just sort of trying to produce it out of the backyard, you know, with a little camera, a little iPhone, and, you know, iMovie, you know. So just thank you guys for anyone who's backed the Kickstarter. I do want to say a very, very emphatic thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, of course, we'll have links to the Kickstarter in the show notes here for this for anyone that hasn't supported yet. And I did have a couple of questions and comments based off what you gentlemen had just said here. I'm curious, will there be for the music that is going to, you know, you guys were teasing that there could be a potential music that is given out to Kickstarter supporters here. Are we talking digital? We talking vinyl? What level of
We'll
music
commit.
production?
We'll
Because I
commit to digital, but maybe, hey, who knows? If it goes really well and we need another stretch goal, I mean, hey, you know, we
I
could
was
do
gonna say, because
vinyl.
I'm a vinyl connoisseur myself, and I can already hear the sweet sounds of Joel McNeely coming through my sound system that I have here. Because I have the cassette tapes from the Young Indy
Oh,
Chronicles
it's great.
music that was released back in the day.
Yeah.
So, you know, the more Joel McNeely, the better, I would argue. And no offense to Dan Madsen, absolutely on this matter, but there is room for more books on this era and this topic. So I am glad also to hear that there is the interest to create a more lengthy, perhaps is the better way to say it, chronicle of this period than just the quick little, you know, behind the scenes book that I think was created for the Lucasfilm fan group probably at the time. Um,
You know, it was a real book. The limitation of it, though, was that it was written during the production of the first season. So like there
mhm,
wasn't even the, you know, Young Indy goes on for so much more. There's 44 hours of Young Indiana Jones,
literally.
and the book basically covers like the first 15, and mostly focused on the development and the early production of it. So the
Mhm,
you know, love Dan, but yeah, absolutely. And I think the joy of the book too is when you're doing a documentary, and you know, or when you're doing a podcast, but mostly for the documentary, it's like so much of the material just by the, you know, uh, definition of the format, like so much of the interviews just get left on the cutting room floor. So
they
like the
do.
book is truly able to give you the full, basically unedited version,
Mhm.
for the most part, but yeah, on a, you know, complete version of the story, and truly able just to give, for those of you interested, you know, you're able to get the full breadth of it, which is so wonderful. And I, you know, I've written a number of oral history books myself in the past, and it's such a great format, and it really allows for people who want the deep dive, who can go for it. So from the very beginning of our podcast, I was very much just like, eventually we should write a book, and
Mhm.
it's great that now we're able to do it as kind of a companion book to this documentary. So it would be wonderful if we're able to get to that stretch goal, because then we can make it happen kind of on our own terms, and make it really special.
That'd be great. And, you know, you guys are employing the I like the indie nature of the Kickstarter, like you guys are saying, right? Then it allows you to quote George here, to the story is the story is the story, right? So it allows you to focus purely on the story, and it gives you that freedom to create what's in your heads, put it onto the Blu-ray disc, and then we can put it into our 4K devices of sorts, or Blu-ray players if you still have them, and then watch them on our wonderful screens. Or if you're a digital connoisseur and that's your way to go, George probably applauds you for that. Then you can move forward with that one. But there are many tiers on your Kickstarter, and I did want to ask you guys, like, what are some of the most popular rewards that you've noticed from people so far, or even just plug a few that maybe that they're the fun ones, right? If someone wants to really give 10 grand, what could they possibly get if they go above and beyond? Daniel, I think
Yeah.
you're
Well,
smiling on this one. Tell
thank
me
you.
about it.
The 10 grand one. So I grew up in the 90s and played a lot of LucasArts video games. I was famous for, like, if there was a Star Wars game, especially on the N64, I owned it. And I think I eventually collected all the PS1 games. I was just, a completionist. And they had this tradition at LucasArts in that time of, they do credits for the game, and you do all sorts of credits and thanks. And then usually the last credit would be a very special thanks or an extra special thanks, George Lucas,
Mhm.
obviously, because he created the company and also Star Wars or Indiana Jones, whatever the game is about. And I thought I remember thinking how special that was as a kid. And I felt like in some ways, we owe that same thanks to George for this film. Like, we obviously would have no film to make if not for George.
Fair enough.
But then it was like, well, if we had a backer who was extremely generous, let's say, uh, they should also receive that very special thanks. And so we thought, why not have a credit at the end that says very special thanks, George Lucas and this person. And as I said to you off air, if it was a married couple, we would be more than happy to have it say, Joe and Jane. It's totally fine. You file your taxes together. You can have the credit
Mhm.
together. It's totally fine. Again, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Believe it or not, I learned it's the largest amount Kickstarter will allow you to have a tier for. So, like,
Got it.
that was fun. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so that's why the executive producer tier is really, it's only $500 less, because it's really it's a fun thing. If you I always say, if you have that kind of money, this is a nice little extra thing that we can give you. I do want to say a shout out to our co-executive producer, Stephen Jarrett, who did back us at the executive producer tier. And we have several backers at the production associate tier as well.
Amazing.
Jerry Holmstrom, Matthew Rose, and Josh Bernhard, who has a podcast as well, Trash Compactor. So I do want to shout those guys out, because they are supporting at that level that they get credit on the film, which is a very special thing for us. But yeah, love that tier. If you're out there and you're like, I've always wanted my name next to George Lucas on a film, you can have that opportunity on George Lucas: The Lost Golden Age.
It is possible, and maybe the more realistic tiers for folks out there, right? There do exist, like $5, $10, 20, all the way up to like 100. I think 100 gets you what, like the collector's edition Blu-ray, which always is a near and dear thing to my heart, with a bunch of the deleted scenes and whatever other mini documentaries that you'll produce at the same time with this. I think just scrolling through it, you guys are like, you're planning to have a premiere for this, and
Yes.
at some point in the future, and getting an invite to that potentially could be on the table, or having a virtual premiere of sorts, right? I think you guys have,
Well, the dream is, we want to have this film done by the 50th anniversary of Star Wars.
Okay.
The Star Wars celebration, which, as Peter
Also in
mentioned,
London,
and I
yeah,
met at in
or LA.
2022,
Sorry.
is in LA in 2027, which is where we live. And so we thought, it's a great thing about LA. It's a big city. It's a lot of theaters, a lot of places
Yep.
you can book. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool if maybe we could arrange to have the premiere adjacent to or around the time of Star Wars Celebration? Because, of course, what better audience of people who would want to attend such an event? I mean, it's this kind of thing. If I was going to a convention, I go to Star Wars Celebration. If there was a film like that premiering somewhere, that I would totally want to go to, right?
Yes.
So that's the dream, if all things slot into place properly. But I do want to point out, as you mentioned, the collector's edition, we're doing that at $100. It belongs to the museum. It's the name of the tier. And that is, I would say, the archival version of the film, in the sense that you're going to have 2 discs with the film, all the bonus features. And you never know with these things, with streaming services, with distribution companies, things go out of print. So if you want to preserve the film, that's the way to go. All of our film tiers, our hard copy tiers, include a digital copy, so you would have that as well if that's sort of the way you watch. But I do recommend a physical copy just for that preservation. I think one thing we're learning now is these digital streaming services and servers and all the AI stuff. It's very ephemeral. Companies can go out of business. You're relying on a company to store your media. You're at the mercy of that company's bottom line and earnings statement, and you should think about that very hard. But we also have a $200 tier called Secrets of the Underworld, which is, I would call it a sneaky tier in terms of how popular it is, because we've promised a mini documentary on the Star Wars Underworld television show as a bonus to that tier.
Yes.
And I will say we've already gotten one story that I loved in an interview we've taken for the film that I wasn't even expecting to get, that relates to that topic. So it is already starting to take shape, what this documentary could be. So that's an exciting one. It's definitely one of, it's not, I think it might be our 3rd or 4th most popular tier as I look at the chart.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic nugget to, because that's like the what if Lucasfilm story, right? It's like, oh, I've heard about that TV show they were planning to do in the mid 2000s there post Revenge of the Sith, and nothing ever came of that. And I'm like, well, they weren't just doing nothing over there at the ranch. So, a lot of work was probably being done, more than we're aware of. And there's that famous test footage and all that circulated around online and all that. But yeah, you guys got wonderful tiers for every level of interest and want there. I can already see April 27. I believe it's April 27. Is that correct for LA? Just off the top of my head.
That sounds right.
I know. My dream, right, would be maybe you can rent out Grauman's and
Wow, I might have to do a stretch goal for that.
Yeah.
$150,000 we rent out Grauman's Chinese theater.
Yeah, get a stretch goal for that, or project it onto the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art and see.
I don't know if they rent out their theaters, that would be very interesting. I don't know what their plans are with that. I know that they have like a community element where, in some way, community screenings will be possible. Hopefully they'll have like an application process or something, and certainly we would love that if there was any way for it to be shown at the museum.
That would be super meta, of course, to have it there, and also like the indie nature of it all. And this is George's Indie Museum, as I come from that world too, right? It's very very much will be in the wheelhouse of making a wonderful experience for everybody to celebrate this incredible era of the Lucasfilm and George story itself here. Now, gentlemen, I'm at my last question here, and you've already teased so much for this, but is there any other nuggets that you want to throw out there, the dangling thread, so to speak, of this Kickstarter and what could be of this documentary as we look towards 2027? Peter, anything else that you want to share about this before we wrap up?
I think the biggest thing for us is the ability to make this on our own terms and to really shine a light on this creative process. Like this is, I think of it in my head as this is kind of a love story, and it's a love story between George, Rick, and just that kind of creative dream, that creative vision. And it's a thing that I think gets lost a lot today in this influencer culture or whatever. But like filmmakers, often come here with hopes and with dreams. And George is one of those guys that actually was able to fulfill those dreams in a way that none of us can even dream of, frankly, anymore, where it's like he was able to make his art on his own terms and do it in a way that he was able to the sky was the limit. He was able to really create his imagination. And I think most filmmakers get into filmmaking because they want to do that. They want to make their imagination real. And usually most of us get disillusioned and then we exit the industry or something. But George was really able to do it. And that is so wonderful and so remarkable. And our ability to kind of showcase that, and seeing it through the lens of like Young Indy as kind of his time where he was really able to fulfill that vision, is just remarkable. And I think it's an untold story, and I think it's truly one that won't get made. I think maybe that's the biggest thing that I
Hmm.
can say
Hmm.
is like Disney, doesn't have any interest in this,
Nope. No, they
and
don't.
and odds are Indiana Jones is on ice for a long time, maybe a video game or something, but Disney is not going to be making Indiana Jones 6 anytime soon. So
Yeah.
so this is on us to do it. It's not something Disney's gonna make on their own. So this is really on us, the fans, on us, the people, on us, to really highlight this story and bring it to life. So join us on this quest, and yeah, thank you.
Fortune
Yeah,
and
we
glory.
really gotta tell this story before it's too late, and that's the key.
Yeah.
And so we really appreciate everyone who can help us do that.
Absolutely. And this has been a fantastic journey learning about the documentary. I can't wait to see it in its final form, but I'm just so excited in its initial iteration, right? You're on like day 3 or 4 of actual production of this thing. And I'm like glued to Instagram at times to be like, is there an update today? Is there who are they sitting down with potentially? Is there an update to the Kickstarter? Is there a new stretch goal? Right. I'm just like on waited breath for like more information because this is such a defining era that is so under talked about and under discussed. And I'm glad that fans like us are going to take the narrative. Like I am so much belief in both of you after this conversation to take that mantle and tell the story in such a fantastic way and tell the story of the people that made the stories and all that stuff and hopefully through this we get more fans of young Indiana Jones and Raiderland Murders, and maybe people look at the special editions that haven't looked at it in the same way before in a different light. I think that would be incredible, and I thank you both for taking this mantle up, taking up this project and moving it forward. And of course folks, the Kickstarter is in the show notes, go check it out. But you also have a large presence on social media too. So, Daniel, where can the folks find you guys online if they want to support in that way too?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram both at Young Indie Pod and at George Lucas: The Lost Golden Age. You can find us on YouTube at Young Indy Chroniclers. A huge way to support us is watching the podcast episodes on YouTube. We're trying to get those views up and eventually monetize that platform. It's a personal project of mine, so please
Mhm.
check us out. We're on, of course, all podcast services, Young Indie Chroniclers, and we're also on X now and Blue Sky, both as Young Indie Pod, and on TikTok as Young Indie Pod, and on Facebook at George Lucas: The Lost Golden Age. So there you
Wonderful.
go.
Well, for all the people that are still on Facebook in this day and age, go check it out. But for all those other social media platforms where they have much larger and engaged fan bases, please go check out their social platforms, of course, and give them all the support. Give a like. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so that Daniel can read his stretch goals over there and monetize that thing too, because every dollar counts towards making this the absolute best project that it can be. And folks, I thank you for listening to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. Go support the Kickstarter again. I'll keep singing the praises of this thing, but it's the Kickstarter link is in the show notes. And I come on, guys, you want to support $200 to even 10 grand. You can get your name in the credits there, right next to George Lucas. You want to do this. Trust me, this might be the only time in your life you get that opportunity. So don't pass it up. Um, but again, folks, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We'll be back next week in your podcast feeds with another really interesting episode. I don't want to tease too much yet on that one, but you get ready for it. That's all I'll say. And until then, may the force be with you. Take care.